Hey guys, how's it going? It's Andy from Magoo Investing. Happy Monday. At the end of last week, we had a lot of really interesting earnings reports. We had Peloton, Snapchat, Pinterest. But the one that really stuck out to me the most, and is the reason for me making this video today, has to do with Ford. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about the recent earnings report and talk about why I think Ford might be one of the most interesting stocks to buy in 2021 at this point. This is a stock that's been beaten down for the past couple years, and similar to how I feel about GE, they've restructured their business in a way that I think could be a great long-term investment potential. This past week, we've seen some wild stories from the auto industry. First came out with General Motors, ticker symbol GM, announcing that they're going to be planning to be fully electric by the year 2035, and then Ford announces that they're going to be investing $29 billion into autonomous cars and EVs by 2025. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Ford's plan to push into the EV space and try to actually legitimize that part of their business, because they've been trying to do it for a while, and I think they're making steps to go in the right direction. Then I'm going to be talking about some of the problems that we've been seeing with Ford in the past and kind of explain the slide that the stock price has seen over the past 5+ years. And then finally, I'm going to give my thoughts and opinion on Ford overall and kind of give my overall thoughts on if I think Ford is worthy about being put into my portfolio, because as of right now, it's had a lot of momentum on its side. And is that going to continue to go on? We're going to talk about it in today's video. Last week, I created a Discord, which will be the top link in the description if you'd like to join that and talk about the stock market with people like myself and other like-minded individuals. Also, before we get started, I do have to say that I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. Anything you hear in this video is just me giving my own opinions on the stock market, and you need to do your own research before making any investment decisions. Also, if you've been enjoying these videos, really appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe button, as it would help my channel out a lot. So with this announcement last week, this is not the first time that Ford has announced that they're going to be investing aggressively into EVs. Back in 2018, they said that they would be spending $11 billion on EVs. So how have they done since that point? According to this article that I found from the middle of 2020, Ford has zero sales for battery-dependent EVs. Well, they have a lot of cars in their lineup that have the hybrid capabilities. They don't have any car that's fully dependent on batteries until the new Mustang, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So at this point, they have many hybrids. The most exciting, in my opinion, has to do with the hybrid Ford F-150, which is the best-selling vehicle for them and is very high profit margins, which we're going to talk about in a bit as well. But as of right now, they're definitely slacking on the fully battery-dependent EVs. And think about the type of cars that Tesla has put out in the past. They don't have any combustion engines involved. And Ford is trying to take steps in the right direction to remove the combustion part of the cars and go fully reliant on battery. But that's going to put in a variety of problems to their growth in the future. To try to help with that, in the past, they've had a $500 million deal with EV company Rivian to make an EV that is allegedly on track for their goals. But there have been some mixed signals after they canceled a deal with Lincoln. But apparently, they're still working on the Ford version. They're just not going to be making the higher end quality, which is what the Lincoln brand is for the Ford family. So getting involved with EVs might be the best decision Ford could make at this point. If I had to kind of name what 2020 was for the stock market, I might call it the year of the EVs. This is a year that we've seen some incredible gains from stuff like Tesla being up 480% in the past year, and NIO, which has become this crazy momentum play that is up almost 1,200% in the past year. Even Nikola, an EV company that didn't have a working product at one point, their stock price is still up 127% in the past year. So why does stock price matter? Because for a company like Ford that has been struggling so much, why does stock price matter? And the reason I think it's such an important thing and why it's critical that they start investing in EVs right now has to do with what the EV companies have been doing in the past year with issuing stock. So Tesla raised $5 billion in a stock offering in September and then did $5 billion more in December. NIO has also done similar things in the past couple months, but this is a way for companies that are very heavy in the debt category, because they have to invest in themselves, infrastructure, and creating new products to pay off some of that debt. And I think this would be very positive for a company like Ford that we're going to talk about in a bit, has a lot of cash, but analysts still consider them to be strapped for cash, even though they're top 10 of all the publicly traded companies when it comes to cash on hand. So EV stocks have become the darlings of the stock market right now, and I think Ford making the push to be a part of that, I think it's going to put Ford onto the radar for a lot of people, myself included. So now I want to talk about the problems in the past, because unlike some of these loved EV stocks like NIO and Tesla, Ford has a history of struggles. And I'm not saying that Tesla has not had struggles, they definitely have, but they've been very consistent for the past couple years. Whereas when I put up the 1-year chart for Ford, it was down at the beginning of 2020, but has bounced back and is up significantly from its pandemic lows. One of the problems that Ford has is that it's a very cyclical company, and all the automakers are a part of this, but cyclical companies are ones that are very dependent on the state of the overall economy. When things are going well and we have economic prosperity, these companies typically do very well. But when we have contraction when it comes to GDP and the overall economy, they don't do well. The easy way to think about it is if unemployment goes up, are people going to be more likely to buy a brand new car? Probably not. And so since 2000, Ford has returned negative 20% compared to 270% from the S&P 500. So Ford has been not great for the past 20 years, but I think we could be getting a switch in the company that's going to really help them see years of positive growth instead of the negative 20% they've seen in the past 20 years. So why has Ford stock gone down in the longest bull market in the history of the stock market? I actually think it's a positive thing, and I want to compare it to one of my favorite stocks, actually my favorite stock to buy right now, which is General Electric, ticker symbol GE. Just a couple years ago, I hated GE stock because my biggest gripe against the company was that they were involved in so many things, but they weren't doing very well in a lot of them. Then you see some positives of GE selling off their appliance business, and they've kind of toned down some of the areas that they weren't doing well. I'm starting to see some of the same things happening with Ford, and I think it's very beneficial, even though the news reports don't look that great right now. So Ford has expanded to areas like China, Europe, and South America, and this was seen as a very positive thing. When you get this international expansion, you get so many new markets that you can sell to. The problem is that they haven't done very well. China was once seen as this untapped area of potential, and it was seen as such a positive thing for Ford. The problem is sales fell 34% in 2019. In addition, they've seen demand in South America plummet. In Brazil, sales were down 26%, are not expected to return to the 2019 levels until 2023. So this is an area where they're going to be struggling for a while. They've decided to cut their loss in areas like Brazil by closing down production, which is going to result in a loss of $4 billion, but I think it's a very positive thing for the company long term. Anytime you see these news reports about jobs being cut or facilities being shut down, it does look negative at the time, but it's a cost-cutting measure and it's seen as a positive long-term thing for the company. Ford is top 10 in cash on hand, which is very interesting because it puts them in similar areas to stuff like Apple and Microsoft, which are these cash cows that have been sitting on so much cash for a very long time. But Ford is in a very different spot than these other two companies. But I think having this much cash on hand is going to be able to pay for these losses that we're seeing from places like Brazil. In addition, they're holding more cash than usual because they decided to suspend their dividend back in March, which is definitely a hit to the company. Anytime you see a company suspend the dividend, not a positive thing. We're going to talk about the dividend as one of the bull cases for why I think it might be a great investment for the long term. But cost-cutting measures like what GE has done by selling off their appliance business, I think is a great move by Ford, and I think it makes them much more attractive for a long-term investment by cutting these struggling areas of their business and focusing on what they're really good at, which is the Ford F-150. So now I want to talk about my outlook for Ford, because this is a very complex question for deciding whether or not I want to invest in a company like this, because there's a lot of different ways that you can take this discussion when it comes to Ford, because they have definitely been struggling for the past 20 years. And if you see potential in the EV section, there are some struggles and some growing pains that they're going to have to go through. So I kind of wanted to lay out my thoughts on how I see Ford as a potential for a long-term investment. So as I mentioned, Ford has not been the most exciting investment opportunity because of the stock market returns, but I think things are starting to look up for Ford. The EV market is rapidly expanding, and companies like Tesla have shown that it's possible to do well in this EV market that was heavily criticized as being unrealistic just 5+ years ago. In 2020, Tesla delivered almost 500,000 total cars, which is crazy to think about the scale that they've been able to grow. Ford is just getting started with their fully electric cars after releasing the Mustang Mach-E this year. And while they've only sold 238 units in the month of January, I think this is going to increase over time when people hear about the results of the car. When Tesla first released their models, there's a lot of skepticism about how good of a product it was going to be. And for what I've seen, the reviews seem very positive on it overall. So I'm expecting this to be a positive thing for the company overall, and it's their first fully battery-dependent EV, which is a very positive thing for the long term. In addition, they have additional EVs in the pipeline with the electric F-150 that's expected to be out by 2022, the Rivian-based car, and they have 5 unnamed EV projects that are supposed to be released in 2025. So they have a lot of stuff in the pipeline, and if you compare this to the life history of something like a Tesla, this would be very early on, even though this is a company that's been around for almost a century at this point. To look at value for a company like this, one of the things that people often look at has to do with PE ratio. But I've talked in this channel a lot about how I don't like looking at PE ratio for some of these companies, especially the tech companies. If you look at the PE ratio of something like a Tesla, conventional wisdom would say that it's so overvalued and you should be shorting it and selling out right now. But for a company like Tesla that has so much momentum behind it, PE doesn't matter to me. The way that I look for value for something like a Ford and how I determined value for something like a GE is by looking at the charts. When I put up the 5-year chart for Ford, you can see that it's pretty much even to where it was 5 years ago. And considering how much growth we've seen in the stock market during that time, I think this is a very undervalued stock. And then showing the chart back from 2000, you can see that it is a long way away from the highs of around $35 that the company saw back in 2000. So when you look at the historical range of the company, it's still on the very low side. And I think this could be a rebirth of a new type of Ford. And this reliance on EVs and the switch that we've been seeing in the auto industry, I think it's going to be very beneficial for something like a Ford that has been struggling with trying to create these new products that are exciting, but trying to sell to these markets around the world that are very different from what they're really good at, which is the Ford F-150. You see the difference in demand for what people in Europe are looking for compared to what the American market's looking like. The fact that their profit margins have been shrinking significantly in international markets, I think it's good to just focus on what they're good at, and I think EVs are attractive to pretty much any market at this point. This is a company that already has the production capabilities to be successful. That was one of the first real question marks that Tesla had, is how much production could they have? Could it keep up with demand? Ford has a lot of the production capabilities to make this successful on a very large scale. One of the things that I'm interested to see what they do with has to do with the charging capabilities. If you don't know, Tesla has all these superchargers that are laid out across the US and in the densely populated areas of Canada. And when I put up that map right now, you can see that it's pretty extensive and very impressive. And then the Chinese company NIO has announced these battery swap stations where you can swap out a battery in less than 5 minutes and get back out on the road. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what these companies like GM and Ford are going to try to do, because when they're trying to release these Ford F-150s, it's going to be a very different market than the people that they're trying to sell to for like the Tesla Model S. The Ford F-150 is for the working person most likely, and it has to have the strength and the capabilities to do that. So I'm very curious to see what they come up with the next couple years, considering the electric F-150 is not expected to be out until 2022. So at this point, it's still very early on in the EV cycle for Ford, and it's very exciting to see them starting to embrace the changes that we've been seeing in the market, because they have been producing a lot of hybrids, but making these swap to fully battery-dependent EVs, I think is a step in the right direction, especially for the climate aspect of it, which I am very bullish on if you've been paying attention to this channel at all. And then the final bull case that I'll mention is the reestablishment of the dividend. Dividends are always a thing that brings in investors, and for a company like Ford that's been around for a long time, cutting the dividend was a very negative thing for the company. And so when they eventually reestablish it, I expect that to be a source of buying pressure when people decide to finally go back into Ford. From the last earnings report, I did not see any mention of the dividend, so it's going to be very curious to see if they mention it at some point during 2021. But to summarize, Ford is very early on in the EV cycle. They finally released their first electric vehicle with the Ford Mustang Mach-E, but at this point, it's still early on. They have the deal with Rivian. At this point, I'm not totally sure how I feel about Ford. Ford seems like a very positive thing looking to the future, but I always get this problem of when I talk about these companies, I do so much research on it that I end up falling in love with these companies. So I'm gonna take a step back, maybe wait a couple days, maybe hear what you guys have to say in the comment section down below to kind of determine how I feel about the company. Because if you're looking at this as an EV play, it is so undervalued compared to the other giants of the market like NIO and Tesla. But if you see it as a struggling automaker that's potentially going into an economic recession, that's a bear case right there. So there's a lot of things that you need to take into account, and I'm not totally sure where I stand. I'm definitely leaning towards the buy rating and less to the sell. So very curious to see what you guys have to say about Ford. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.